I'm joined now by Imam Monawar Hussain and Rabbi David Mason. A very good morning to you both.
Morning.
Good morning.
I want to start by asking you both the same question, if I may. How has it been for your communities and the people across the city that you've been talking to over the last 2 months? If you could just sum that up a little bit. Rabbi, I'll begin with you.
Thank you for having me on this morning. Yeah, it's been really hard for the Jewish community. There's obviously been a very large recorded rise in anti-Semitism. Children have been worried going to Jewish schools, wearing their uniform. There's been a rise in physical abuse on Jewish people. So I think there's a greater nervousness in terms of going around doing what we're doing. And I think maybe a greater aloneness. People from the Jewish community feel very much alone, that others don't understand the pain they're going through. Many Jewish people have relatives and friends in Israel, and so are quite close in the sense to what's going on. So yeah, it's a difficult time.
And Imam Monawar, if I could come to you.
Yes, it's been a very difficult time, I think, just to kind of articulate and express and echo what Rabbi David has said. I think it's seeing those terrible images of human suffering has been, has taken its toll on people, a lot of anguish and pain, and deep sadness at what's been going on, and of course. That's led to polarization in our country as well. And what we've tried to do is to bring people together to create a shared space where we can, mourn those who've been lost, but also work to build friendships and ensure that those voices of hatred towards Jews or Muslims that we both communities and the whole community really of people of other faiths or no faith stand together against hatred of all sorts, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. It's been very grim and very difficult, but we've continued to pray for peace and pray for all those who are going through a very, very difficult time.
I think what you've both summed up pretty perfectly is that anguish and pain that is felt on both sides of this. And we do talk about it in terms of both sides. But I want to say, and I think this is really important to keep reminding ourselves of, because you've both touched on it, is that there is more that people agree on. People both Jewish or Muslim, Israeli or Palestinian, or people who also don't come from any of those communities. There is this overwhelming desire to see peace and to see any killings from anyone stop immediately. And I suppose what I want to then ask is, when it is so polarized and it has become such a difficult conversation to have without it being filled with anguish and pain, and that leading to a rise in tempers, how are you keeping that peace and that solidarity front and center amongst people who are hurting? And when people are hurting, they are angry, and that's a really understandable human emotion. How are you managing to just stop people from falling into anger and rage and hate when it is such a difficult time? David?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And that's one of the motivations for the vigil that we were at on Sunday. It's hard. I think there's two things here briefly. One is the communities themselves, my community, Monawar's community, the Jewish community, which is diverse, the Muslim community, which is diverse. And many within our communities will naturally take a side in understanding the conflict. And I think that's okay. As long as it obviously in both our communities doesn't slip into, in a sense, hate of the other side and a desire, in a sense, to erase the other side. And that's what I said on Sunday. And I think that's really important. And it's important for those, in a sense, not touched by the conflict itself to understand that as well. You're right, there is a lot in common. But it's okay to be angry. Jewish people will feel angry at what happened on October the 7th, very angry. People from Muslim communities will feel angry about what's happening to Palestinians not caught up in the conflict, who have been killed in the conflict now in Gaza. If we can ensure that we meet each other, we bridge, we maintain the relationships that we have between each other, disagree, but disagree without hate for the other. That is a model for society, to push the extremism to the extreme where it should belong and not let it set the agenda. And rather than divisiveness being the agenda, that it's important that bridging and relationships is front and center of what we do.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put, and I think you could apply that to pretty much any issue that society contests or talks about or struggles with. Is if we can find the bridge and keep the extreme, because the extreme is the minority, and I always repeat that because I think it's really important. If you listen to social media exclusively and just read a headline, you can fall into the trap of believing that these extreme views are the majority and that is the tone of everyone. It's not. They are absolutely the minority. They just get a lot of airtime, and I think that's really important. Monawar, I wanted to ask you the same question of how are you bringing people together, and how do you keep people, I suppose, from then their anger falling into hatred, and when there is so much pain and anguish about?
Well, absolutely. I mean, as David said, there's anger as well, and one of the first things that I did with a friend of mine from Cambridge, Ed Kessler, was to organize a meeting of Muslim and Jewish community leaders, a kind of confidential space where we could come together and people could share their anguish and pain and anger, and do so in a civil way, and everyone listening to each other. That was really important, so no one's shouting and getting angry, and so the message is lost. And that was very, very constructive. So that was about six, half a dozen from each side, so about 10, 12 people in a room, and there's a lot of emotion there, and it kind of it enabled people to actually understand where the other person is coming from, and that was very helpful. And I think we need more of that, quiet spaces where people can listen to each other and to share their pain and to share their concerns for the future. And the more that we have of that, the more chance there is that we can actually build solid relationships. And I also just say that I think on the whole we've had great relationships between the Jewish and the Muslim community and other faiths in our country, and that's because a lot of people have dedicated their time and energy into building those relationships. There's already trust, and so we're tapping into a great pool of trust and friendships already, and we want to try and maintain those in this very difficult time.
Absolutely. David, it's a long history of violence between Israel and Palestine. This is not, I mean, it's a new iteration, of course, but it's not a completely new conflict. There are so many people, as you said, David, who predominantly want peace, who are praying for peace, and who just want this to end, and they want to see a solution. How hopeful are you that we can reach that? Because for lots of people, it feels like this latest flare up, if you will, the violence that has erupted on both sides. It feels like it has taken us back further and further from the hope of any kind of resolution.
Yes. Obviously, it's hard for us to, in a sense, talk about the solutions there. It's a very difficult political, conundrum. It's been like that for a long time. I think one thing I would say is the importance of good leadership. How important leadership is, and I think we see that in the conflict between Israel and Palestine, in terms of the lack of leadership on the ground there that can vision a better future. What that will be is complicated, and we need to be creative about what type of a solution will allow both Israelis and Palestinians a future in the land that they both connect to.
Yeah.
And I think here too, leadership in our country, political leadership is really important, and I mean by that a political leadership that doesn't divide and polarize, but is careful about its language, so that it is about bringing people together and allowing space for a society of neighbors.
Yeah.
Where people from different communities, cultures, backgrounds are here, are part of our Britain, and are neighbours with each other. So I think that leadership is at the moment what we're crying out for, and that would be a step, I think, to an improved future.
I think that's a really good point, actually. And I heard the MP Margaret Hodge talking last week about how she was there in Israel a few weeks before the attacks. And the thing that was most remarkable to her was that on both sides of this, there was not the leaders that we needed who were working towards peace. So it's a really good point, and something that we definitely need for sure. David, I just wanted to ask you as well. Tonight is the first evening of Hanukkah, which is, of course, the Jewish Festival of Lights. I imagine it's going to be a very significant Hanukkah this year and quite a tender time. How will Jews be coming together to celebrate Hanukkah tonight in London?
Yeah, I can already see on my phone, messages from people related to Hanukkah that are on a sort of a bittersweetness, a sullenness, sort of the joy of Hanukkah with sorrow. In some ways, Hanukkah is great because it's a very strong family festival. People get together in their families. So it's a time for light in the home, and I think that's really will be a great strength to Jewish people, actually, that they have Hanukkah. And so, wishing all those out there from the Jewish community a Hanukkah Sameach, as we say, a happy Hanukkah. And it will be, there'll be a sadness with it at the moment because of the grief coming from the conflict, but important nevertheless.
Indeed.
Can I also just say happy Hanukkah to everyone listening as well?
Yes, absolutely. And a beautiful sentiment to end on. A happy Hanukkah to everyone. Thank you so much, Rabbi David Mason and Imam Monawar Hussain. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's 7.